Okay, according to the clock, we are live. Thank you very much for joining us today. I have Vic Deshotel with me, and we are going to talk about
Okay, according to the clock,
micro communities.
are
Vic, first
live.
of all, thank you very
Thank you
much
very much for
for,
joining us today. I have Vic Deshotel with me.
and I have a bit of an echo, and I'm not quite sure where that's coming from, but
I think
that's
it
okay.
came from
We'll
mine. I had you.
No worries. We're able to overcome all difficulties that come our way. Vic, again, thank you very much for joining today. Again, our subject is micro communities. And there are a number of things that we started talking about prior to us going live. And I'm not quite sure of all these things that we're dealing with today, if we're looking at the here and now and understanding the challenges. There was something that you just mentioned before me clicking the live button I'd like to go ahead and piggyback on, and that is that opportunity that we have through the chaos, through the uncertainty, through the manipulation, perhaps through that fear mongering. I'd be curious to get your take on that one.
Well, we were talking about what triggered that. Oh, Musk buying Twitter. It
Right.
was the symbology of this very richness buying our conversation platforms, right? And of course, others have already done that as well with newspapers and things like this. But there's this strange chatter going on about um, what is happening, what the truth is, who is this man, what is going to, how are things going to change? Some of it, people are excited. Others think it's going to be the end of the world with the way we are communicating with each other. A panic kind of conversation. And I think where we were going with that was that I had mentioned that it is a live, real point, a touch point on the bubble of the story that we have been living in for many centuries, um, and it's popped the bubble. This is the collapse of the mythological comprehension of who we think we are. And it's an example. The examples are plethora, it's everywhere. In every domain, every approach to what we have decided culture is on the planet, no matter where you are in the world, everyone's having an exasperated, exaggerated feeling of collapse. Something's wrong. It doesn't feel good. Doom's kind of feeling. There are optimism points throughout it, but the overriding storyline is something's going down and it don't feel good.
Hmm.
And
Although that this myth that you're referring to is something that we're actually very accustomed to, I would even go ahead and argue that we're very comfortable with these myths. And the biggest part about this whole mythology and what we believe, that what we think that there's some sort of uniqueness to this mythology, that we have our religion and our beliefs firmly anchored in. And the basis of that, of what you're trying to put together, is to wipe all of that away. Perhaps if you can describe to us a little bit about what that process looks like.
yeah, well, I wouldn't, that I would try to wipe it all away. I have no power at that level to wipe something away. Maybe some people do. But what I do see are cycles of the ages, these ebb and flows of the way the cosmos works and the way consciousness plays into it, which we seem to have some kind of lead game in this because we haven't actually connected with other aliens or other people that may have it as well, but maybe they're there. But from the perspective of planet Earth and the human condition, um, it seems that our belief systems are all going awry. Columbus didn't discover America. I call that the Columbus syndrome. We've been learning that. I have in school all my life. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, he didn't actually, there were already people here, and he didn't even land on the continent. He landed on some island, and on, right? And he was also a master of slaves and da 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 da. So the storyline is suddenly like pop, it pulls out and leaks, and from that all kinds of other belief systems we're starting to go, wait a minute, that's not what really happened. And so these truths are collapsing. And a myth is when multiple belief systems come together in a dance and synergize or create a frequency or vibration, that we call culture. So myth is the foundation of culture, in my opinion. Belief systems make that up, yours, mine, etc. When they become synergistic with each other, an emerging mythology comes forward. So what we have now is the collapse of an old mythology, and it's not just one person's or one country's or one tribe's myth. It's the whole planet of human knowledge and nuances and knowing that seem to be collapsing all at the same time. So what is that about? And that's what took me actually literally off planet to say, well, maybe this is more than just us on this planet Earth. I've got, and it took me to cosmic. And the frame of reference then, often mythology is cosmic or astrological, and the stories come from looking up and gazing into the stars. We still do that. It's not that that's what the old people used to do or the ancients. But what we have now is not even being able to see the stars the way we saw them before. So science is changing, right? And that's part of the collapse of the myth as well. And in that time, it's a lot of panic, chaotic, end of the world could actually happen. But at the same time, I see it as an opportunity for the new myth to emerge. And this is in cultural context, and I propose that it has to be a conscious act of how we create ourselves in this new age. So an old age is dying, mythical. A new age can emerge. We can either, as Joseph Campbell once said, fall into the forest and just let it, overtake us, and we become that. Or we can consciously walk into the forest, find out what's there, and manifest a myth that we feel is of right intent and a healthier way of being. So we're at this crux, very interesting time. And that's why I think the whole re-rise of people wanting to go make their own communities, a lot of names for it, right? Intentional communities, eco-villages. I tend to call them micro communities for a reason maybe we'll get into later. There is an opportunity here to take advantage or work with the collapse and create something anew. But we have to be very conscious in the process, or we will fall back into the old story and just rebuild what has already really doesn't work for us anymore.
If we were to break down that of what you were talking about into those elements that I consider to be the basis of this cultural framework, that being the values that we have, the beliefs, and of course, I love this example that you gave where our beliefs are based upon some sort of myth that may be true, or perhaps that bubble is burst. That doesn't necessarily mean that our values have changed due to the fact that we've gone through this reckoning. And then, of course, the norms that we have, which are basically patterns or activities that we perform that are based upon all of this. We're not really aware of it, but they're deep seated within all of these other components, that being the values and the beliefs. How do you see this concept of the myth, especially looking at it from different regions and different cultures? How does this all come together in your mind?
Well, for what we know historically, we're in one of the first ages. I actually believe there were many ages way back prehistorical, but we won't go there today. The age that we're in, we've only been connected globally at this level with the internet for a few years, right? It's sort of a new phenomenon, and we're now talking about it as the global brain and different things. And you'll get some different perspectives. People that like technology or don't like technology will see it as good or bad. I do want to set the tone on for your question is that technology for me is an act of creation through us. It's an extension of us. It's not a thing separate from us. How we use it is based on right intent. And what I feel is, as a technologist that came from engineering, Silicon Valley, did all that show for a while, is that there's a loss of the sacred in our creation, in our creative process. We've taken that out, we've extracted it for whatever reason. And for me, bringing that back, what I'll call sacred technology, a sense of the sacred manifesting creatively and with sacred in mind, is a reflective act that wouldn't bring us to the state we're in technologically, misusing technology, I'll say. Um, that said alone, the good thing about all this technology, whether you think it's good or bad, is you and I are talking because of it, right? And you're in Vienna and I'm in USA. It's an amazing thing, and it is bringing us together. And the consciousness of the human condition is aligning in a very different way. Nobody really knows what's going to emerge from it. And this is a key point about mythology: is there isn't going to be an Elon Musk or somebody famous or powerful that's going to define the new myth. The new myth will emerge through a collective intercourse between people like you and me having conversations that then act on those conversations to create the change. So we are who we've been waiting for, and the technology used in that way, I think, is extremely powerful. Now, we do have to be careful because for every light side, there's a dark side. And if for me, especially because I come from that design realm, I'm always asking, should I be making this? How is it going to manifest itself? What are the possibilities of its interaction with others beyond what I think I like about it? You know, asking these kind of broader questions about how we connect, how we collect. And one other thing about collect, and I'm going into another conversation, but the importance in what people have called the singularity, which is often technologically positioned. For me, the singularity is the alignment of the individual, which is many, right? 7 billion of us, with the collective, which is one, which is the alignment of these different communities or tribes or societies that emerge. And in the dance of the collective and the singular, the rise of the individual autonomy becomes stronger, not less, because the collective knows how to support the individual. Contrastly, also, the individual knows how to serve the collective. So the singularity for me is when that alignment happens, and technology does relate to that because it helps us in the union of this new potential. And I see this as a baseline for the communities that are going to emerge over the next few decades. Now, I went in a lot of directions on your question. You want to pull me back?
Sure, will do. And I have one additional question to boot, and I will close the circle and relate these components to each other. The basis in my mind is this constellation between values, which I'm going to interpret
Yeah.
as being the spirituality that you're referring to, those things that we hold dear, that will be manifested in some sort of beliefs. These are these things that we believe. In my mind, these beliefs are being shattered by the information that we're getting tied to what we've been taught the whole time being an untruth, fake news, whatever way we want to call it. And then lastly, in the way that we manifest all of this in the form of norms and those ways that we do things within our society. And
Yeah.
I'd like to take that basis and go a little bit further with regards to this idea of spirituality and the use or the misuse of technology. The I do agree wholeheartedly that are those things that we hold dear, that there's a much more of a commonality than we tend to recognize, probably because we've been getting a narrative that keeps bombarding us with these so-called facts, that we are looking at things from a different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one can argue that that has been one way that we have been misusing technology to spread a message that we are working with different beliefs or different values. Which, and if I understand you correctly, Vic, your point is that we have that commonality. We have the commonality between our value system, and we need to make sure that there's a common understanding and get rid of all these things that get in the way.
Well, look, can I play off that?
Yes, please do.
Um, so you used a bunch of interesting words that are important, and language context is going to be critical in the change because the
Always.
words that we use and the definitions that we think they are changing through a collective process. I mean, just watch kids on texting, you know, they have a whole different language, and they use words almost opposite sometimes of what they mean. They get it. So there's an understanding of the language it's used. But that said, the key words that you mentioned, values, belief systems, myth, right? Mythological, trust or truth, and meaning. Meaning. And in the collapse of a global myth, the meaning will collapse along with it. Loss of meaning is where underlying trauma and fear will arise, not able to sense any meaning in life. We have some of the highest suicide rates in the world right now. You can blame COVID, or you can blame a much bigger picture. Something's going on where people are losing their sense of autonomy, individuality, and meaningfulness in life. And trust and truth are very close to that word meaning or meaningfulness. And trust is broken down everywhere. Just watch healthy news or bad news. Everybody's getting caught doing something stupid, especially in our politics, right? Those that are running the world are um, are challenged, and we are challenged to recognize, oh my God, I thought he was somebody else. You know, the truth of pick your person, Trump, Obama, I mean, in the United States, now they're all seen as liars, Biden, etc. Well, in part, they are lying about something, but they're also caught in the loss or the breakdown of belief systems that people don't know what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is left. So belief systems are changing, and with that, values, I'll propose, you were saying that they're common to us. Values are changing too. Now, we could say changing, not like going from black to white, but they're going deeper in context as to what it is that is valuable and what do we value and why. Some of it is very common or archetypal. I'll add that to the word list, is the archetypes, which Jung was big on, right? Way back when. He's one of the better ones describing archetypal senses of the human mind or the human consciousness. Even those are starting to shift a little bit. So the storyline for the future, we have to be able to step back in all of this complexity and chaos. Step back. I'm going to say step in to the complexity and chaos rather than run away and say, can we simplify this? I'm overwhelmed. As a community, we have to say, this is overwhelming, but I need to keep going. Who can support me? We are in chaos. How do we come together and hold a sense of peace and place for each other during this time of breakdown? And in that holding space, the belief systems will reframe themselves. The truths will reemerge. They won't be the same truths that we once thought we knew. So, and the value systems will adapt and adjust. Some of it will be back to doing the right thing, you know, this right intent. I like the word right intent versus rightness, not righteousness. Those are like opposite things, right? Those will reemerge. We have to give ourselves the space to deal with the trauma that we've and let that out, let that pus come out. We have to collectively come together and hold a place for the collapse to happen, not try to hold it back, and then step through it into something new. And consciously and in our thought patterns, we have to set the tone for that. And that's what's gonna bring forward new communities, new tribal conditions, new ways of living with each other, etc. And yes, that has to change. We've been a part of the mess up of the planet, done a pretty good job. There are lots of things. We're going through our teenage era now, coming around the corner on a very fast bike. We don't know if we're going to slip off the edge or actually make it around the corner. Being an optimist, even though I talk about some very negative things sometimes, think we're going to make it around. But we're going to have to come together in a very different way. We cannot do it with strategic planning as a start point. So when we build a community, say, well, what do we need? We need energy. We need this. What do we need? Well, let's ask, first of all, what do we think energy is? Because it's changing. You know, what is education? Some of us are asking that now, at least, right? It's changing. kids don't need to go to college anymore. There's a whole different dynamic for ways of learning, et cetera, et cetera. So did I address some of your points?
Yes, you did. And I think it's very important to make sure that our audience is very well aware that we're not just talking about something that's theoretical, but you are working on a practical model. And I think that would be this is a great opportunity for us to dig a little bit deeper into that of what you're currently working on. If I understand correctly, it's a project that's taking place in Costa Rica right now.
Yeah. It was a bootstrap in on an opportunity. I've been working on this communal aspect for many years, trying to bring my skill sets and passions and desires and sense of spirituality into kind of a what do I make out of this? I'm a creativist. I want to make something.
Hmm.
Well, it ends up being I don't want to make some widget or wadget. It ends up that I want to be a participant in making a community that behaves differently and acts differently and innovates differently. So these communities are very innovative. They're not just, you know, nice places to show up and grow and eat food together. These are beyond that. They're very extensive in terms of what innovation is. And it ends up, long story short, that I have a project down in Southwest Costa Rica, and I'm working on the physically implementing some of these ideas and thoughts into real tangible applications. Starting with, for example, I'm presently working with an architect team to design a house that's based in bioarchitecture, biological architectural design. So, which is the next generation of architecture. This is going to replace the way we build now, which is more kind of square and non-geometrically resonating with sacred geometric configurations, which is what the universe uses to create itself. So we will be reflecting as above, so to below. And in this home that I'm building, I want it to be a demonstration site for that as above, so below, and look at the bioarchitectural construct. So a physical place of living, but then also building out a community. This particular community is based in a wellness program out of Hippocrates, is the owner of the land, knows the owner of Hippocrates. Hippocrates is a wellness center. People that have cancer and are on their last resort and Western medicine hasn't worked, they go to this kind of place. So it's going to be founded in that. And we're looking at a number of different strategies and dynamics for using it as a prototype for a multi-networked micro-community fishbowl. I mean, so it'd be all over the planet. Mike, the group you and I talk, maybe you'll be a micro-community in Vienna. I'm talking to a gal, Adina, in right next door to you, Hungary, and they're doing a micro community. In fact, I'm going to be over there in early May. And there's one in Hawaii. There's half a dozen, couple dozen in Costa Rica. Costa Rica seems to be a mecca point for these new communities to emerge. People are moving there, on and on. So it was trying to, and the eco village groups that we met through the onlines, developing different kinds of regenerative correlations with community. Thousands of people are showing up, right? They're all looking to create and design something. So my goal is actually to be a prototype for an actual grounded community, but then network it and create a learning system that actually creates flows of learning across these micro communities that are then, that information is directly applied into something, into energy for the community, into an education system for it, into a governing process, whatever. Lots of models out there for all of it. The one thing I haven't seen is the connections between these so-called micro communities to be very stable. They usually isolate once they get their own little thing going. And what I think we have to do now is increase the level of communication across these micro communities in this meta network in order to actually succeed as a micro community. So it's sort of this micro macro dance, right?
I've spoken to a number of individuals tied to common desires, if I can phrase it as such. and we keep coming to the same conclusions that the intent is pretty much uniform, that we have a common understanding of what the problems are and what we're trying to achieve. But there's just the same, there seems to be a certain type of isolation, because the knowledge management part, the one that you alluded to, is the one that we see. Ironically enough, as we talked about technology and we talk about the internet, it's the knowledge management where we struggle the most. I'd be curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Um, Knowledge management. So it used to be called information management, if maybe you remember back in the day, right?
I'm afraid I'm
Uh,
old enough to remember,
yeah,
yes.
right. You and me both. And before that, it was data management.
Hmm.
And one of the things I saw happen is that data becomes information, information becomes knowledge. So, and then knowledge becomes meaningful. So there's like this kind of serial process or evolution of our learning. Um, and we are spending a lot of time managing information, but not working with the knowledge. This is my opinion. Some people would disagree, I'm sure. But getting
I'm
in,
not, I'm not going to disagree with you on this.
well, maybe
I
we're
have some
doing our,
additional elements, but I'll let you finish, of course.
yeah. Well, and in this the key thing is looking for meaning. I mean, if we want to architect something, it's recognizing that the loss of meaning is so architecturally important to the human sense of well-being for whatever reason. We could do a whole study on that. Some are, but recognizing that we've got to not eliminate information or knowledge management, but get beyond that so that we can see more at a meta level of what this knowledge is and how we're referencing it and how we're applying it. And in our technology, one of the things I'm looking to do is actually turn it on its head around information management and turning it to relational management. We're starting to see a little of that, but I still relational, they're relating the information to the information. Okay, fine, that's important. But I'm talking about a Vic and a Mike relationship. I'm talking about the humaneness of relationship that should be the objective, the final quest or goal of
Hmm.
technology, because connection is the primary source that feeds us. It is the spirit. It is that way to get to the Godhead of whatever you want to call, because it lives in the chasm of the information or the data. It is not that in and of itself. So getting to a relational perspective and using our technology to deepen relationship should be the objective. Where right now the objective is how do we manage this information a little bit more, a little bit better? Can we create a better search engine in order to find the word the? How many times is it used? Or finding different energy solutions. And it's so overwhelming that you shut down. I have myself, and I can handle quite a bit of information. It's overwhelming. And that was when I got hit with, oh my God, this isn't even about that. It's about the relationship that's missing, and that the sense of meaning that comes out of relationship then creates the energy aspect necessary to run the community. So it's kind of flipped. It needs to turn on its head, as I say.
The key word I think that you mentioned is this idea of humanity and that ability to be human. In that we do not look at elements as being purely transactional, that we look at each other as being human being. I'm going to use the phrase that just piggyback on the phrase that you used, that would be the relational, the relation between human beings.
Mhm.
And of course, we have a number of challenges that kind of get in the way. First one being the ability, and I think it's truly tied to ability, or capability is there, but because it's not necessarily practiced, I think that we have lost the fine art of being able to perform these actions, specifically tied to making that differentiation between information and knowledge. And I'll go one step farther. You mentioned the word meaning. I use the word wisdom, which I think are a little bit different, but we're all going in the same path,
Yeah,
clearly.
they're
So
related. Yeah.
They're
Mhm.
clearly related. So on the one side, we know that we as human beings are capable of performing these actions. We've done it through the ages. This is something very innate in for us as human beings. The same token, due to the way that we have been managing things, and I would argue this path has worked exponentially over the last 30, 40 years,
Mm.
that we've lost the ability to be able to perform. That means that that innateness that we have as human beings, this relationship that we have lost how to actually do these things that actually should be quite natural. uh,
Yes.
Unfortunately, technology, uh, although it was never the intention, we can't blame technology. Human beings that use technology, we should never forget that the technology has been seen as being the solution instead of actually being a vehicle that we use to go ahead and accomplish all these goals that you and I have been talking about.
Yes. I would agree with that. And there's some very interesting, technology is accelerating at such a rate that it may actually eventually be out of humans' hands, called AI, artificial intelligence. And it's a whole other conversation that's going to have to come up in terms of designing these micro communities, right? We can't just put aside that, well, we don't like artificial intelligence, we're not going to use it. Guess what? We're going to be used by it if we don't use it. So,
I would not say future. I would use present tense
yeah, it's
on
here.
this one. And I think one of the key elements when we start looking at AI and the way that AI is put together, we're talking about components that are based on absolutes. In other words, you are either a zero or you're a one, meaning that there is no option for any type of ambiguity. But we both know in nature that it doesn't work this way. We do not work with zeros and ones. So in my mind, we're talking about two different models that are clearly incongruous. And
Mm.
so the real danger is that we are working with this mindset that that we believe in technology in such a way that the information that we're receiving is true. And in fact, and I've caught myself on this one, in fact,
Mhm.
that I will believe the results of the technology because I think the chances of them getting it right are even higher than my ability, which is actually a pretty sad statement. And I guess it's kind of an act of contrition, if I may put it as
Well,
such.
it is. We are the seed pattern for this emerging technology called AI.
Hmm. Completely.
So the concern I have is our behavior. I'm not that impressed with it. Our way of thinking and the way of making decisions. I'm not that overall impressed with what we've done so far, um, and the hierarchy that we create in order to make that decision making to happen. Well, that is being designed into the early algorithms of AI. It's still AI is still very young, very immature, but as every immature thing, it does take the seed patterns that it is given, and it plays off those. I don't know that it can dynamically flip and change and evolve for on the darker aspects of our behavior or things that haven't worked so well. And we're designing in things that need to not be decided this way or thought about that way into our algorithms and giving those to the AI machines, and they're feeding off that to become something. We don't know what it's going to become. So my flag on it, my concern is that we're running a little too fast with our amazingness in the technology development, not recognizing that we've got a long ways to go with our own behavioral development as sentient beings.
I would go one step further in arguing that because of the framework that we're using to put all of this together, it's anchored in something that possibly might be considered to be true at the time that we're putting it together, but then later on will be considered to be false. But unfortunately, we've kind of hardwired all of this, and I think that goes back to what you were talking about, Vic, tied to the dynamic component that we really should have within these models, but we know are not currently existing. And the question is whether it's even possible. We could leave that for another time. But the real danger is, number one, that we are basing it upon truths that we have at this point in time when the programming is taking place, number one. Number two, we're talking about a clear bias of where all of this information is coming from. Thirdly, once we get to the point of where we are being influenced by the AI at a later period of time, where we've already proven that what we thought was true then is actually false, we keep going through the same patterns and we can't get out of it. So it becomes this vicious circle where a number of us already feel that we're encapsulated within this Alice in Wonderland component that we can't get out of. I'm really afraid to see where that actually takes us later on, because we know that in comparison to humanity and the human capability of actually recognizing all these components, that is not to be found within these vehicles that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that you're talking about here. I would put it in the realm of the now let's get my brain sides flipped. The logical side, the logistical side, then that, right? And we have this, pretty much our world has been built on if then that. And we've created all of these strategical planning processes based on that. And what has happened is that's gotten very large, the left, and the right has gotten very small. On the right side, there isn't no if then that. It's the, oh my God, it's the awe moment in the middle of the woods when you get an insight about how something could be created or the decision that needs to be had, etc. It's the artistic realm, and bringing that back into communal design is going to be absolutely essential. One of my favorites was a book called Art and Physics by Dr. Leonard Schlein, who was a medical doctor, and he wrote this book, and it was in like one paragraph. And he talked about, based on his research, that art is 300 years ahead of science, almost always. At least this is as of when he had written it. And he gave the example, for example, of geometry. Geometry emerged after the artists showed dimension in their art, right? So the dimension then allowed these lines to be drawn, and you could actually create geometric three-dimensional configurations. But the art expressed it first. The other, he said, is the chaotic nature, abstract painting a couple decades ago, right? Abstract painting was another voice of the consciousness expressing what's coming. And we have moved since into that chaotic nature, trying to hold on and not allow chaos. We even redefine the word chaos as unrecognized order, etc. But so things began changing in terms of what we thought order and chaos was. And the artist defined that first, not the scientist. The scientist follows the artist. And I think that this is really important in terms of bringing back the artistic nature into our communities. It's not like this nice thing that kids do when there's spare time. It is absolutely critical to the evolution of our brain, our minds. And guess what you tap into from that side of the brain? The mythic realm. And I point upward because I say it's something more meta-logical, if you want to use the word logic.
Mm-hmm.
It's meta frame that breaks down some of the logistics that presently are killing us. I actually believe are presently killing us. So that mythical realm is that touch space that the artist knows how to get to. Man, you get a good artist, let's watch them sit around before they start painting on their palette. They go into those realms. That needs to come back. And the resurgence of the need to connect with plant medicine, I think that's another thing that's happening. And now we're trying to legalize it and all these different things, whether it's psilocybin or other mushrooms or hemp or cannabis, etc. This place to go into the realm of that is more unknown and broken free of the logistical realm of the existence that we're in is absolutely crucial for our own future. I think that strongly of it. And maybe it sounded like a bunch of things I was talking about, but they're all related to your point.
For sure. And I'm going to close a couple loops. In fact, some of the things that you talked about, and I will not go down the route of quoting Donald Rumsfeld with the unknown unknowns. We won't go down that route. But
Okay.
a couple of things. They going back to what we talked about with knowledge and meaning or wisdom, and perhaps looking at components that would be innate in us. And I think the based on your description of the artist who is not cognitively going through an if-then scenario to come up with whatever this demonstration may be of what's actually going on in this person's head,
Right.
but rather it's based upon a feeling that needs to be permeated in some fashion. And so then the real question is perhaps we're using the wrong measurements to denote what knowledge is, and perhaps meaning and wisdom being one part of the equation. And secondly, if we're talking about enlightenment, and if we agree that the artist is a, a good artist, an artist who is capable of actually taking these concepts and putting them together in a form that brings additional insight to the recipient of this work, that this idea of enlightenment is not something that is only purely for these individuals per se, but rather that is something that's innate in us as human beings. It's just a question of whether we have been given the opportunity, that whether we feel that we have the freedom, that we feel empowered, and maybe we might even have this ideal in our head that we see ourselves making these things happen, which might even be the most important thing, being all components of what you've been talking about.
I love messy conversations. This is great.
Yeah, but I
Well,
think we're taking a clear direction, in all honesty.
paradoxically, I think it's very directional.
Hmm.
It may sound messy and all over the place to some people.
Because it's not transactional. It is understanding that we live as human beings within systems, and we need to be able to think about these various components that are to be found within the system. And just because we have lost that ability to perform these actions, does not necessarily mean that we're not capable of doing it. Or if these
Yeah.
systems are not valid, I'd raise 2 points.
Yes, and I started using the word whole systems instead of systems,
Hmm.
so that it would suggest or hint to systems being logistical and holism being irrational, and that both of them together in a dance are what create reality. And so we can't isolate in one or other. And most of us still use systems. There is the word whole systems is starting to show up now,
Hmm.
and I think that's a good sign. But the other thing you brought up, which, boy, okay, we'll go a little bit further down the rabbit hole if you want. Yeah. The issue of time. Um, a lot of people are sensating something funny about time. And it's more than just, oh, I'm getting older. Time seems to be, going faster or slower or whatever. There's something else going on based on the conversations I'm having with people. One person even said, I actually believe that time, the future creates the past, not the other way around. So things are inverting. It's like, okay, I had to sit back on that one and was trying to imagine, what does that look like in a reality where the future is the lead and the past is being manifested or changed based on the future. So this collapse of time, I think, is a very important thing to discuss or to bring into the conversation around design, in community design, community development. It sounds like a weird philosophical or scientific thing. No, if you go deep enough down that timeless rabbit hole, other dimensions start to emerge. And I think that that's where we need to go in order to create. And I think that has to happen more upfront than is happening with the communities that are emerging today. Whether you call it an eco village or intentional village or whatever, is we've got to get into this realm more deeply rather than, ironically, a lot of the meetings that I've been in more recently, it's no different than the meetings 10, 20 years ago that I was in. We got to hurry up. We got to finish up. We got to. Well, the gotta works logistically if you've already got a logical framework that works and you got to get to from one point to another. But in the collapse of a global myth, those bets are all off. And more room for ways of counsel and openness, a timeless conversation has to be allowed without this urgency of needing to finish and get somewhere. So my points on time, bringing that back around.
We have a point that was raised by Sarah stating that perceiving quality over quantity as we develop from Newtonian to quantum. Any thoughts on
Mm.
that?
Perceiving quality over quantity as we, yes, and quantity are a dance. Neither are going to go away, but we are in a quantifying world. We want to quantify, measure everything, and often measuring it before we actually have redefined what it is that we're measuring, which is the quality aspect I would suggest Sarah Ember is pointing to. Um, I think Sarah's in my group. Is it the Ember? I see the name. Hi. In one of these Eco Village design groups that we're doing. The Newtonian to quantum is a re-languaging of our new science. So the Newtonian world is part of the dying mythology, and that things are now being proven wrong or proven inaccurate, right? With Newtonian, even Einstein's physics of reality are showing that they are not accurate in this new realm. And hi, Sarah.
You have your confirmation.
Yes, indeed. In this new realm, the quanta, I think, is a very important, if we can step out of what's happening in the quantum conversation, is that science itself is saying, we don't have it figured out right. We got to come up with another model to try to define where the reality is going. And I think this is actually fractally infinite. So we will always be trying to define what reality is, but the infinite of reality cannot be fully touched. It can always be directed toward this God source or sacred spirit realm that we often speak of, mythically, religiously, and spiritually. Those realms need to be reached for, and in that, our language is going to be changed, and our scientific assessment, analysis, and logical or rationale will be created out of it. It's moving a little bit too fast, in my opinion, in terms of quantizing in these computers, what they can do. Oh my God, it's no longer 0 and 1. They now have 4 states for every decision that a computer can make: high, low, in the middle, and in between, which just explodes the potential of possibility of creating consciousness through machines. But again, that's another story. Is bringing this back around, is trying to address this dance between things that we have been absolutized with and always reference it with something else. One of the things that I think works really well is to always have, if you have something that you believe in or you want to do, it has to be cross correlated with something else, with the purpose of not finding out if one's better than the other, but to see what emerges in between. So this would be in the quantity and the quality. There's something in between that will be realized first. And then it can come back down and we can quantify, we can qualify our works. That becomes the science realm. And science is the place of deep manifest. It's the place where we actually create shit on this planet. But we got to be careful that we don't recreate with the belief systems and the value sets that you mentioned and the sense of meaning that we had, and is dynamically clustered and is clustering into new ways of thinking and believing, to allow that space to happen and be conscious of it. This is defining the new myth consciously, rather than allowing a myth to emerge that we don't have awareness of.
The fact is, we do have awareness, but we have put that so far back, and perhaps maybe because it's working in our subconscious and we don't have it in the front, it makes it a little bit difficult for us to maybe talk about it or demonstrate in some fashion. And when we talk about that that transformation that's taking place, going from the mathematical to the physical, using physics as a basis. I'd like to go ahead and close another circle. You talked about the relationship. You used us as an example, understanding that the results that come out of that relationship are unique due to the consistency of the two individuals or more individuals that are involved. That means that it is unique. It's an unicat, and we should
Mhm.
not forget, especially looking at this quantum model, that that is the basis of that of what we're really talking about in my mind. That we're talking about unique entities that cannot be replicated as such. Certainly not on a very simple level, due to the fact that we're talking about unique beings that go ahead and make all this take place.
Yeah, that's nice. I do see quantum physics starting to look at the relational aspect. The simple example is, you tweak this guy, this molecular submicron thingy over here, and they're now showing that it tweaks over there with zero time. Instantaneously, they're aware of each other. To me, that's an awareness, a relationship that is already there, or it became there through our observation of it. In that case, observed observer doesn't matter. For me, getting to your point is the importance of addressing relational and connection, not the thingies as much as the relationship between the thingies.
Mm-hmm.
And in community design, I think this is going to be quintessential. And maybe quanta, the language of quanta at some level, can help us to put words to this relational dynamic. Um, there's an awareness in the quanta that isn't necessarily in the old physics as well, and there seems to be a little more room for that which we don't know versus, well, we've got it all figured out now that the math works. The other point I'll make is that they're starting to look at geometry differently in terms of the actual science of geometry, to the point where relationship itself, if there was a foundation for science, it's relationship itself. So in sacred geometry, it's all about relationships of certain energy node points with
Mm.
each other.
Mm.
And they create these beautiful, beautiful mandalas, beautiful buildings, architect, everything that we see as beautiful. Our bodies have different sacred geometric configurations that they're based on. And it's, again, it's getting beyond just what does that molecular structure do, but how is it related with something else? So I think quanta is moving in that area a little bit, and we can use it. But I'm also, at the same time, think it's moving a little too fast in terms of, at least there are a few scientists and physicists that are being touched so deeply that they are going into the mythical realm, and you can hear it in the way they tell stories or the way they present the information. That needs to be brought into communal design.
Mm-hmm. And I think to close the circle, and I'm very cognizant of the time, we'll need to start closing up. And I still want to give you
Sure.
plenty of opportunity to talk about that of what you're doing. Or when we start talking about common values and common and those beliefs that we have, and this common thread, breaking down the mythology that has been based within the cultures that we've had. What do you think of the idea, if indeed we can foster that common spirituality, where we know that these elements are to be held true, and with that we don't have to worry about replication, we do not have to worry about pure knowledge transfer, because we have that common value, and if we believe that that we're talking about an unicat, those things that we create on our own, then it doesn't even matter.
Now you're getting into a juicy one. Um,
And I only gave you 5 minutes to respond.
well,
I'm
okay.
just being cheeky. You
Well,
could take 6.5 if you want.
oh, gee, thanks.
Mm,
Um,
anytime.
I'm going to differentiate this using some weird kind of information management oriented language. Is we have this thing called IP, intellectual property. It's a control mechanism to make sure that somebody's idea is given to or owned by the person who came up with it. Right now, that's another whole discussion in terms of where IP has gone and how messed up it is. But it's also not. It's important. Deals with self replication, or they call it scalable, right? And scalable is a capitalistic term for saying how much money can we make? How many of these widgets can we make times the X profit on it? Oh, I can be a millionaire, a billionaire, a gazillionaire, whatever. So that has to go. That has to change. Maybe not fully go away. And I'm going to use the term instead of fractional scaling, which I just talked about, which is a very linear, how many can we make and how fast, to fractal scaling, which says that ideas emerge and we all have them, and we should get some authority or representation for the idea, ownership, so to speak, but not to the point where it's controllable. Someone else can take that idea and fractalize it. In other words, he or she may have created the seed pattern for a wonderful new healthy idea. That can be given to it's done in one micro community and it shows up in other micro communities, but it's fractalized. So the seed pattern is still evident, but it changes. So every community uses it differently, just like fractals. The seed pattern of a fractal, every time it replicates itself, it actually looks different, but there's a sense of similarity. So that, I believe, is actually the future for designing micro communities. And it's one of my missions with the network, is that there is no IP. This is the model, follow it or die, or go somewhere else. It's fractalize the nature of the seed pattern that you find, identify with it, create some of your own seed patterns, and or use the one and make it work for you, with one caveat, I would say, with right intent. And that's a whole nother conversation as well in terms of what does that mean, right intent. So
I would not only agree with you on that, but I think to perform a deep dive on a subject like that, we need to be able to look at those things that are common or the commons. And I'm afraid to do that properly, we need to even go back in history to start with John Locke and the theory of property, with the intention of understanding where did we go wrong in understanding that this belongs solely to you. What was the rationale behind it? and and how did we go astray? Because unfortunately we almost have to perform a reverse dialectic, going back in time to understand what was the rationale, what was the motivation of all these things that took place, so that we can properly unravel it. But that would be for another place and time, I'm afraid.
yeah,
And I would welcome the opportunity, as you mentioned, that you'll be coming into my neighborhood, that we can go ahead and do
yeah,
that in
early May.
person. I would very much enjoy that conversation, Vic.
Let's do that, Mike. There's
Okay.
lots more to be had here. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed the conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. And I hope for those of you who have been watching our conversation or listening to our conversation, either live or perhaps in a recorded fashion, that you were able to get some added value out of that, of what we've been talking about. I clearly got a lot of added value from your insight, Vic, and for that I'm very thankful.
Back at you, Mike. Let's talk
Okay.
again soon.
Alrighty, good deal.
All right.
Thanks again for viewing our conversation, and look forward to having you on board the next time we go ahead and go down that rabbit hole.
Here we go.
Alrighty,
Bye bye.
cheers.